Welcome to Mind Shift Power Podcast, a show for teenagers and the adults who work with them, where we have raw and honest conversations. I'm your host, Fatima Bey, the Mind Shifter. And welcome, everyone. Today we have with us Dr. Kimberly Boynton. She is out of Southern California. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's got 20 plus years of working with teens. And one thing I love about this woman is that she keeps it real and she's down to earth and she's balanced. I love her and I think you all will too. So how are you doing today, Dr. Boynton?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you for being on. I know you're a busy woman, so I appreciate this time. So today we're going to talk about phobias. And I know it's a subject that not a lot of people think about too often, but it's, there's a segment of society where it's still a real big issue. So I want to be able to reach out to those who have the phobias and those around them to hopefully gain some understanding. So let me start off by asking you this. What is a phobia?
So a phobia is more of an intense and irrational fear of a specific object or situation or activity that poses little to no actual danger. But people with phobias often experience excessive anxiety, panic attacks, when confronted with the object or situation they fear. But a phobia actually can impact a person's daily life, and it causes them to go through great lengths to avoid the source of their fear. And I'll be honest, like one of my fears and phobias is snakes. Like I don't care when people say a snake looks cute. I'm like, there is no such thing as a snake in my eyes. So I'm like, and that's one of my, I don't know. I mean, fears and phobias are kind of along the same lines, but yeah, that's my phobia. Hands down is a snake. So yeah, it's life altering.
I used to have a phobia of spiders, which we all know is called arachnophobia.
Arachnophobia.
When I was a teen, into my teens. I remember my father laughing at me because, it was an old building and there's always spiders in every old building. I don't care where you are.
Yep.
Anyway. And there was a spider that landed on my hand somehow. And it wasn't even a poisonous spider or anything. It was just landed on my hand. I freaked out so bad that he was laughing at me. Now, if a spider comes near me, I would just go after it with murderous venom. So it's different. Why are you in my space?
Right. Yep.
Now I'm not scared of them at all. I'm the opposite. I'm a warrior against them. So
yeah.
Since you were, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the difference between fear and phobia. And the reason I want to do that is sometimes people think that if they have a fear of something, that it's phobia. They are not the same thing. I know that phobia contains fear, but not all fear is phobia. So can you explain to the audience what the difference is between the two?
Yeah, well, fear and phobia, you're right, are related concepts, but they do differ in the terms of intensity and duration. And again, the impact on somebody's life or in person's life, where fear can be more temporary. Fear is usually a temporary emotional response that can actually, diminish once the threat has passed. So in other words, like you were talking about spiders. So when you see a spider, it's like, oh, there's that spider, and you change your mindset, like I'm bigger, I'm powerful, whatever. But sometimes it's like you can remove yourself from the situation or you wait till it passes by. If you're stuck in a car and you see it, you're like, okay, I'm going to whatever, but it's not controlling your whole life. So once that spider is gone and out of your mind and out of your, your personal space, you're back to normal, where a phobia is more intense and the fear goes beyond what's considered to be a normal proportional threat, where the fear is just excessive and it just leads to distress, anxiety. It's persistent. It lasts longer than, even if you have a fear, arachnophobia fear, you're going to stay in that moment for a lot longer. That spider could be gone, out of sight, out of mind. You could have squished it or somebody could have came on and squished it, but you are still letting that spider impact your life. And so there's different types of phobias, as well too, where you have like the specific phobias, like your arachnophobia, claustrophobia, things like that. But then you also have the social phobias, which are more intense to like your social interaction, which we're seeing now, in the schools and, as we're coming off of pandemic. So even though they kind of mimic each other, usually fear is temporary and phobia is more intense, and it actually just makes your whole life, it controls your life, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So what I gather from that is the difference between phobia and fear is, like you said, the intensity of it, the
Yes,
degree to which it controls your life.
correct.
And so when you put it like that, I may have to correct myself because I'm not sure that what I had was a phobia. It may have been just a fear because it didn't control my life after it was done. It was just like, I moved on about it, didn't think about it anymore, and it didn't affect like whether or not I went into a house or anything like that. It was just I would be greatly afraid when I saw them. Then after that I'm over it. But I know there are a lot of different phobias out there. And so you mentioned one that I think is I personally believe is probably one of the biggest phobias out there, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, and that is the social phobia.
Yes.
I want to talk about what are the different common phobias that people deal with, but especially since you deal with teenagers specifically,
Mhm.
what is the most common phobias that you see with teens?
The common phobia is the social anxiety phobia. That's
Yeah.
the main one right now that I'm dealing with, is how to socialize and be and come off of, like I said, coming off a pandemic and us not being sociable and not and being, socially distant. Now people are trying to figure out, where they belong. So the social distancing caused a huge phobia. And you have to remember too, going back to what you said, you may have a fear of spiders and you might have thought it was a phobia, but fears can lead into phobias depending on how much you're focused on this
Mm,
fear.
yeah.
So whereas like if we're in a fearful situation, let's say for example we're walking down the street and out of nowhere we get mugged, and we get held up at gunpoint, that's a fear, and after it's done, it's like, oh my gosh, like you lived through it, whatever. But does it always stay in your mind? It does. So let's say, for
Oh
example,
yeah.
something happens again, or you see something that can trigger that, where it could start leading into a phobia. And I've seen that happen now too,
Mm,
where kids, now I'm gonna be real. Like I don't watch the news. Like I stopped watching the news years ago. My first degree was journalism. And after being a journalist for so long and reporting and, on the back end of stuff, like reporting facts and what really isn't facts and hearsay, I stopped watching the news. There was nothing ever positive that came out of the news. Nobody
yeah,
wants to
I
start
get
their
that.
day of, oh, let's find out who got shot here and, who got in
Yeah.
an accident here. So now kids are watching the news more. And that's the first thing I tell them: stop watching the news. Stop watching the news when you wake up in the morning, because you're setting your whole day of fear. And I have so many patients that are like just afraid
Mm,
to go out of the house. They're afraid to, you got teenagers now that don't even want to get in a car and drive. And I'm like, what? Like you have the ability, you got your parents. I have one girl, her mom bought her a car. It is sitting in her driveway and she is 20 something years old and she will not get in her car and drive it because she's so afraid because of all the stuff she sees on the news. I've got another little girl who they're getting ready to go on this big cruise and she don't want to get on the ship because she's afraid, Titanic's going to happen. And,
yeah.
so it's just fear of, they're creating these phobias off of, things that have happened or things they've heard. And again, the news is just ever changing every day. Something new, something's developed and, developing news. So I keep telling them, stop watching the news, stop watching it. So fears are turning into phobias, and that's what's happening right now.
I would consider that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. What you feed will grow.
I'm sorry, what was the
I
question?
said what you feed will grow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. If you're feeding negative, if you're feeding your fears, your fears are going to turn into phobias, and there you go.
They're going to turn your anthill into a mountain by feeding
Absolutely.
it.
Hands down, I agree with what you just said.
And it's a principle that I teach a lot. And I throughout anything I talk about, I used to be on the radio and I did one of my radio episodes. I don't remember what it was titled, but it might have been called that, but what you feed will grow. But I just talked about the fact that, if you keep feeding your monster gets bigger. You got to
Absolutely.
starve the monster, as a part of the solution. But it's a true principle in life. What we feed will grow. And if
Yes.
we feed negativity, then how are you going to get anything positive out of that? You're
Right.
not.
Yeah.
It's like if you feed your body garbage, you ain't running a marathon.
Yeah.
you know, you know.
My two biggest slogans are faith over fear and test into testimonies. I actually went and
Mm-hmm.
I had a fear, and not a phobia, but I had a fear of needles. And I actually went and got faith over fear tatted on my arm just so I can remember that, because even something small, and no matter how how minded we are, and I know you and I could probably attest to this too, like we still get fears, but we know how to shift it, very quickly. But there's sometimes where you have something that just happens and you forget that. So I have it on me now, so I can look down and say, faith over fear. I got this. God got this. Somebody got this. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to let that fear control my life. And that's what I teach my clients, my patients, that your faith is bigger than your fear. Like, acknowledge it, because if you don't acknowledge it, then you're giving it power still. So acknowledge it so that it knows, like, hey, I see you, but I'm not going to acknowledge, I'm not going to stand here and hold a conversation. And the way I explain that with them is, it's like, when you're at work, we all have those coworkers, like we see them and we're like, whatever, they're there, but we don't choose to have a conversation with them. So it's kind of like that. You're walking by your coworker and you're like, hey, how you doing? And keep walking. But you're not going to stand there and say, hey, how you doing? So how was your weekend? Like, what did you do? Like, because you don't care. Like, you're not acknowledging them in the sense of like, I want to have a whole conversation with you, but you acknowledge their existence. So, that's what I tell my patients. Acknowledge it. It's there. I know you're there. I see you, but I'm not going to talk to you like that. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to talk to somebody positive.
Okay. So that leads into what I wanted to discuss next was, okay, so we know what phobias are and we know fears. How do we combat them?
Definitely, if you have some kind of fear or phobia, definitely seek support. So you have to talk to somebody, and not necessarily a professional right away, because nobody thinks like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to a therapist. You want to talk to somebody you can trust, like a friend, a family member, a teacher, or
Great
whatever
advice.
it is,
Yeah.
somebody that you can share your feelings with, that can provide you with an emotional support and some understanding. And educate yourself, learn more about what your phobia or your fear is, because the more you can understand the nature of your fear or phobia, you can help demystify and make it more manageable. And then obviously, like if you're talking to somebody or you're confiding and somebody's not understanding or they're just not getting it, then absolutely, hands down, that's where you should go. Seek professional help, whether it's with a therapy or a doctor or something, so you can kind of get evaluated and see what it is. Positive visualization is huge, and I use this with all my patients too. Is you have to use positive visualization to imagine yourself facing successful managing feared situations, and you have to reframe the negative thought. And I know that's easier said than done, but if you set realistic goals, to face your fears and celebrate the smaller victories, and you're not so hard on yourself when you don't hit those bigger ones. So there's a lot of different things we can do, but first starting is understanding it, acknowledging it. It's almost like a trigger. Like once you know and identify what your triggers are, then you're able to find the solution and not focus so much on the problem. And that's what I feel a lot of people are doing, is they're focusing on the fear and the phobia, but they're not focusing on, okay, well, how do I get over it? So again, it's like for me, like for snakes, like now I'm like, okay, now I can look at a snake on, TV, or I can see a snake on social media or whatever, and I'm not weirded out about it. So I try to find something cute. Like I said, people are like, oh, but it's a beautiful snake. And I hear that so much. And in my mind, I'm like, there's nothing beautiful about it. But then I started, you know what? Let me find some beauty in it. So now I've found like, you know, pictures of beautiful snakes. And, you know, to me, again, I don't think they're beautiful. They are beautiful creatures. So I had to take the fear out of what the creature was itself and just look at it as a whole, as a different thing. And there are like the colors. So I started focusing on the colors, the uniqueness, you know, the designs. And so that made it less like, you know, whatever for me. Would I go and hold one now? No, I'm still not there. But again, like I said, it's about taking them small steps. Before I couldn't even do that. I mean, I'm telling you, like, I don't know what it was, but the minute I clicked on something on social media to try and you know, conquer my own fears of this, all of a sudden they wanted to start sending me like reels with snake videos. I was like, okay, wait, hold on, too much, like, like too much, you know. I was just taking baby steps, but you find something positive in that negative. So again, taking small steps, and like I said, for example, for me is finding the beauty in that particular reptile that, you know, made it more tolerable, so that when I see it, I'm not like, ugh. I would have an anxiety attack. I'm not even kidding. I see a worm or anything that's I don't know what it is. It's just something that slithers. Like, I'm not kidding. Like and the stupid thing about it is I had a iguana. I had two iguanas, and I'm fine with them because they were walking, but something about the slithering and the little tongue coming out was just not appealing to me. And so, like I said, I had to find something cute or something different, you know, so that it wasn't so intense, you know. So, and that's what you have to do. You just have to mind shift, you know, which is what you're about, like mind shifting it, you know, into something like, all right, like, I don't know if there's beauty in a what do you call it, a spider, but, you know, one of the good things I can say for that is those daddy long legs, and those are the biggest. Now think about this. The biggest spider, not a tarantula, but that we see commonly in our house are those daddy long legs. Those are the most venomous ones, but not to the humans. But they eat all the little ones. So that's why for my fear with spiders, I'm like, you know what? That's a good spider. Like, he's the most venomous one, but he's a good spider for me. So I'm like, go on, you go ahead and stay there because you're going to eat all the other bugs in here. So
have your meal.
Right. So I'm like, I'm going to leave you alone. And so I found the positive in that, like, oh, he's going to eat everybody but me. I'm good.
I'm laughing because I know that there are so many people out there right now who are listening, who are giggling because they have the same fears of snakes. They're just like, she's right. I don't know what them crazy people talking about. But let me tell you, I've never had a fear of snakes. I never liked them either. But I watched something on TikTok where this guy it was a particular kind of snake. I don't even remember his name or what kind of snake it was, but he caught my attention. I found it riveting and I watched his whole video. And it wasn't a short one, it was a long one. So he showed the lifespan of this particular snake from egg to hatchling and how it removed its skin. And for the first time in my life, I saw the beauty in a snake because I saw its life cycle, not its look, but it's the life cycle, where the organs were, where the parts of it were. And I began to see the beauty of its creation. So for me, I began to see the snake as beautiful, not because it was physically pretty to look at, but because of the beauty in its life cycle and how it functions and works. And I just think, God, he did a lot of great things. So when he made this earth and everything in it. So I love it. But I wanted to add, you know, I wasn't thinking about this until this conversation, but the mind shift piece, I think, is very, very huge in dealing with any kind of fear or phobia. Or maybe even just not allowing your fear to turn into a phobia. When you talked about worms, as a kid, I hated worms. They were gross. Ew. And next thing you know, I was digging them out the ground and handling them like nothing. And just like I was scared of, people are scared of mice.
Yeah.
I have killed one. Oh yeah, you don't come to my house. I beat a bat to death before.
Oh no.
I'm crazy. Some people say I'm crazy. But the thing is that what most people fear, and all of those may have been previous fears for me. But I have chosen, and I didn't notice this pattern until now, I have chosen to take whatever I feared and make it fear me,
Yep.
and make
The
it
mind shift.
basically make it my bitch. So
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
like
Yes.
you
Yes.
have to take on that attitude.
Correct.
And to the listeners, I just want to plant the seed. Some of y'all need to take on that attitude with certain people in your life.
I was just gonna say that if you relate that to bullying,
Yep.
you put that same mindset and you turn around like, oh no, not today. And like I said, I mean, I can even attest to that. And we kind of
Mm-hmm.
talked offline about what I went through,
Mm-hmm.
and being bullied, for my culture. I literally went in sixth grade. I don't know if you guys have those, where you're at, the scholastic book fairs where you could go to the cafeteria and buy books,
When
every.
I was a kid, I remember those. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I bought a book on, it was called How to Become Popular, because I thought, okay, well, if I keep getting beat up, obviously I'm not popular because it was a popular
Mm-hmm.
kid beating me up. So for me, that was my mind shift. Like, okay, I'm not taking this anymore, but I don't know what to do. So I bought this book and I read it and I thought, you know what? Yeah, this ain't going to happen anymore. And when I made that mind shift, at 11, 12 years old, that I'm not going to let you take me down anymore, for so many years, it worked. And the funny thing about it is the people who used to beat me up, the main one girl that was the leader of the pack, I went and we got into it and we threw down and we became best friends after that. And but
That
it's like
happens a lot, actually.
you do. And, but that, I see that happen in schools a lot where, maybe not so much now, but I mean, in my time frame, like growing up, it was like, you could fight and then, whatever, you guys squash and you guys are best friends, where now it's like, it's gotten worse. But yeah, I agree with that. Like your mind shift and you turn around like, yep, nope. And then to top it off, like we're scared of some spiders that are like itty bitty smaller than what we are. And I'm like, what? Like, why
And
am
the
I
thing is,
afraid of you?
we're afraid of mice, but they're more afraid of us.
Oh yeah.
They're not running up to us trying to fight. They're running,
Yeah.
and we just don't realize it. And it is a matter of changing perspective. How we view things is how we deal with them, good or
Yeah.
bad. And no matter what subject you're talking about, it's a principle of life.
Correct. Sometimes
Yeah.
you have to dive into where that fear came from too. And so for me,
Yes.
as a therapist, I do dive into where those fears came from or what
Mm-hmm.
started it or what triggered it. And sometimes when you can go back and figure out where it started from, where the root of it was, you can acknowledge it, you can, nip it at the butt right there and then move forward. And then it doesn't become a fear, or the phobia turns into a fear, which again, the fear can alleviate after time. So those are some of the things. Like for me, like I know like where my snake fear came from. Like I never even had an encounter with the snake until after I got the phobia of it. But the fear of me for snakes came in from hearing stories growing up when I was a little girl. My grandparents had land in Guam and they had their houses in Guam. And so my grandfather would always come back telling me stories because their house was in a jungle. So, living in a jungle, you got all sorts of critters and things
Oh
coming at
yeah, there's
you.
always snakes.
Yeah. And so I'd hear these stories of my mom would tell me, oh my God, the snakes used to come through our house. And so I think that's where my fear came from, because a lot of the babies were getting strangled because the snakes would get in the crib and they'd,
Oh my
strangle the
God,
baby.
really?
Yeah. And
Oh.
so hearing these stories growing up, like I never saw a snake until I was a lot older. But because I heard these stories, I already feared snakes, so I know for me, I had to identify where that fear came from. And then
Mm-hmm.
from there, it became a phobia when I first saw my first snake. And I was in sixth grade on roller skates and, roller skating over to my friend's house. And this girl was walking around with her little boa around her neck. And I was like, oh, that's that snake thing that everybody's talking. And seeing it around her neck, put me back into hearing those stories of them, they're going to strangle and kill the babies. And so from there, it led into a phobia. And she was like, no, it's not strangling me here, touch it. And I was like, And she said, no, I'll put the head this way. So she turned her back to me. She had the head in front of her, so they were both facing this way. So I got up the courage to do put the hand on the snake and touch it. And then my friend came home and she was like, hey, and I turned around, I looked at her and I felt this blah, 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 blah on my hand. I turned back around and the face was at me. I freaked out, fell off my skates, got banged up, cut myself up. And so from there was where I developed the phobia, because I associated, the pain,
Mm-hmm.
the hurt, falling down and, whatever. And from that point on, it just got worse. So
I want to point out a key factor in everything that you just explained, a big principle. What you feed will grow. You were fed the stories, the
Yep.
negative stories about snakes. So that fed into something that turned into a fear.
Correct.
And then that fear turned into a phobia. How often are we doing that to our kids? And how often are we doing that to our friends? Or how often are we having that done to us and don't realize it? When we are, and association matters too. So
Yes.
when you associate things with certain things, negative or positive, well, they can be negative or positive. They can really dramatically affect how you perceive those things. So if you had been told stories like that video that I saw of the guy that talked about what a healthy snake egg looks like for this particular type of snake, and what it looks like when they're born and how they should look when they're healthy. And like, if somebody had talked to you about that first, promise you that fear may have still been there because it's still a bad thing. And what
Right.
you heard about those snakes was true, but it wasn't the only piece. It wasn't the only truth. It was only a
Correct.
piece of truth about them. And so how often are we doing doing that about other things? So sometimes we're fed a fear of everybody who looks like this is that.
Yes.
All boys are fuck boys.
Yep.
All men are going to try to screw you, young woman.
Yep.
That's what we hear sometimes. It's not true.
Yeah.
So we hear a lot of things. I'm just using that as an example. We hear a lot of things that are not true. Every woman is going to be a gold digger and try to steal from you and take from you, and she don't give a crap about you. Those are also false things that are fed into some minds.
All the time.
And although this show is for teens, there's some adult teens, some
Yes.
grown teens who we call adults who still think that way because that was fed into them by someone that was hurt by whoever they're talking about.
Absolutely.
So when we're talking about phobias on this show, but I want you all to understand, listeners, to take a deeper dive into all of it and how it relates to all of us, not just the extremity of phobias. But what do we have a fear of that maybe we shouldn't? Maybe we need to learn a little bit more about for example, the person that you said you threw down with her and she used to bully you and then you guys became best friends after that. I'm going to guess it's because you got to actually know each other.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
That's exactly
when you
what
get
happened.
to know something, it's kind of hard to have unrealistic views about that thing or that person. Because
Yes.
sometimes we can have a phobia of a person. For many different reasons, I'm not going to use the word of phobia, but extreme fear of people who are like the one that abused us.
Yes.
And that is dangerous because now we're putting everybody who's like that abuser in the same basket. And you're going to miss out on so many beautiful opportunities in life. If you do that, you're also going to misjudge people and maybe do harm to them when they don't deserve it. And I'll use again the example of men. Yes, there are a lot of men who are abusers. And when it comes to sexual abuse, 90% of them are men. That's an actual fact. But
Correct.
it doesn't mean that 90% of men are abusers. Those are two different things. And very often, and I'm using this as an example because I think it's one of the most realistic ones that is very prevalent. We think that, especially as women, we don't necessarily say that phrase out loud that all men are abusers, but we teach it in various ways. We speak that into existence. We have that mentality and attitude, and it's wrong. You have to get to know the individual, or at least look at people as individuals, and maybe then you won't have some of those same unnatural fears. Because sometimes you are looking at a midget like they're a giant, and they're not.
Right.
What were you going to say?
So on the flip side of that, on the other end of the spectrum, it's funny you brought that up because when you're saying, we fear the people who abused or, the ones that are like our abusers, on the flip side of that, some people actually go towards the same like-minded people that are abusers because we're afraid of finding something better, that we don't deserve better. So, and I see that a lot with sexual abusers or sexual predators or DV people, that they find the like-minded ones because they fear themselves. Now they've lost their self-worth. So they fear that they're not good enough to find somebody else. So they keep attracting the same type of people whether they're physically abusive or sexually abusive, and they deal with it because it's easier to deal with it. It's easier to control because they know what's going to happen already, so they can control the aftermath of it. What they can't control is when somebody actually treats them good. They can't control those fears of, okay, is it just now that they're treating me good and then they're going to turn on me? So some people will actually gravitate towards the ones that, hurt them versus, seeing the red flags and going the other direction. And I see that more than often than the other.
Yes. The fear of the unfamiliar is,
Yep.
is the way I like to call it sometimes. There are many different ways that you could really title it, but the fear of the unfamiliar keeps people in bad situations. And same principle, learn more about what it would be like to be out of that situation. Get a better understanding of who you are as a person, because you will not go for better or accept better if you don't believe better about yourself.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I can't force that on anybody.
No.
I can't make you see yourself better. I can do the best I can to try to get you to see it for yourself. But I can't make you see the value in yourself. And I see so many beautiful people walking around.
Oh, yeah.
Adults and kids who don't understand their value. And so they accept less because they don't understand their value.
Well, and I tell everybody, set your standards, set your expectations, because how you view yourself and what you think of yourself is how, when you meet somebody, what you're allowing them and how you're allowing them to treat you. So if you have low self-esteem and you have low expectations, then, if I meet you and I feel like that, then I'm allowing you to treat me like I have low self-esteem and I have no values. But if you're empowered and you have self-esteem and you know your self-worth and you self-love, now when you meet somebody, those are what you're allowing them to treat you. So I tell everybody, like, what you are with yourself is how you're allowing the other person to treat you. So don't let them, if you don't want to be treated, with disrespect, and you don't want to be treated, less than what you are, then don't think that for yourself.
Absolutely true. I'll end that with something I like to say. Don't allow yourself to be treated like a pebble when you're a diamond.
There you go. Ooh, I like that. I'm a diamond. I'm a diamond in the rough.
Well, but you know what? Every diamond was in the rough before it shined.
I agree.
Every diamond was in the rough before it shined. And we make the mistake of thinking that everybody's got to be perfect when we look at them. You big dummy. It's a diamond developing. You see a lump of coal because you think too small. You got to look bigger than that. Don't you see that the coal is in the fire refining itself? Yeah. So with that, I want to ask you about a project that you have coming up. You have a magazine coming out. Tell us about it.
I have Energy Magazine, and we just dropped this last issue we just dropped is called Voices Heard, and we just dropped it a week ago. And it's basically the Gen Z and the alphas. And what it was about was, again, since 2022, my patients have, and I see everything for everybody from, all ages and stages of life. But I used to see individuals and couples more than, the youth and teens and things like that. Since 2021, 2022, when the world kind of opened back up and everybody started, being able to socialize again, and we got to start seeing patients again in person, it changed to where now I have more youth, more teens, more young adults, which is the Gen Zers and the alphas. So what I've been hearing, and I'll be honest, like it was a period of time in there, I want to say maybe about like a year ago, like hearing all this stuff that I was like, this is stuff I didn't learn in school. Like, I don't understand what half these teens are coming to me about. And there was everything from gender identity to pronouns to, and I'll be honest, like I thought there was just a rainbow flag. And this little girl, 9 years old, she wasn't even 10 yet, 9 years old, broke it down. Oh no, Dr. Kim, there's this color flag for this. There's this color. Do you want me to write them down for you? I was like, no. I'm like, please don't. I'm like, yeah, this is too much for me. But I literally was still under the impression the rainbow flag stood for, the different lifestyles. And she broke it down at 9 years old. I'm like, how do you know this? So that's when I started, researching and like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. I don't know what all this stuff is. And then it occurred to me, like, you know what? Just listen to them. Just listen. Like, forget what you learned in school. Forget, everything else, and listen to them as a person. And so from that, I started understanding. I started seeing the pattern. I started hearing it. So every single thing that I got out of what I've been hearing for the last couple years is they just want their voices heard. Yes. They don't care if you don't understand their pronouns. They don't care if you don't understand what they're identifying as. They just want their feelings validated and they want to be heard. So that's where I came up with the voices heard. I said, you know what? That's the addition that we're going to do. And that's the piece we're going to do. Young people need to hear from their own peers. They can listen to us and think, okay, well, we're the experts, they'll listen to us, but it's nothing more powerful than hearing somebody their age, an 11-year-old hearing from an 11-year-old that says, hey, I relate to you. I went through that, but you know what I did? And they're going to relate to that more. For my patients, they think I'm old. They're like, oh, but Miss Dr. Kim, you're old. So, you've been through. I'm like, wow, I'm not that old, but okay. But, you put another, again, a 15-year-old with a 15-year-old that, hey, I did that. I felt like that. I identified as that. But you know what? I really wasn't that. And this is why I thought I was that. And so that's where I came from, Voices Heard. So we just dropped this issue, and the front cover has, our Gen Zers on there. And our alphas, and then inside through the whole through the magazine. But with that, we're doing a weekend summit that's coming up February 23rd through the 25th in 2004, where all the individuals that are in our magazine are going to get up on stage and be able to speak. So we're trying to reach a bigger platform to where, I have my patients, I have the magazine, I have, the in-person, so I could just reach a broader spectrum and a bigger platform of more people to reach, to kind of hear what's going on and identify with, what, their peers that they're going through. So this is going to be a huge thing coming up. We have a lot of different guest speakers coming in, motivational speakers, celebrities, influencers, because again, like, I've done career fairs where I walk in there and I tell them what I do, and they're like, oh, their first question is, well, who's the biggest, celebrity that you know? And I'm dropping names and they're looking at me like I just said something from like the 50s or something. So I'm looking at them and I ask them, well, like, well, who's your celebrities? And they're dropping off all these names. And I'm like, I must be old because I have no idea who they're talking about, but they were all, similar. So I went back and I started Googling. They're TikTok influencers, they're YouTubers, they're social media. They're not even people in the movie theaters. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So it made me realize like who they're really getting influenced by is what they're seeing, on social media. You would think TikTok is like the only channel that exists. Like, I don't even think people even watch your regular channel 2, 3, or 2, 4, 5, 6, 7s or whatever they are on TV anymore. Everybody's social media. So that's where I was like, okay, I need to pull from those influencers, to reach this generation. I need to pull those influencers and bring them in my magazine and bring them onto the stage, because those are who they're going to listen to, And so for me, it was hard because I'm not from that generation. So I had to take my staff and go, okay, let's look up the top 10, TikTok influencers and let's get them and, let's go after them so we can get them here, because again, they're going to listen to them because they're an influencer for them. So it was a challenge.
Well, how can people find out the information on that?
Go to our website. It's Energy Magazine, and it's inner, like inner strength, inner child, and then like energy. So it's just inner and energy combined. So energymagazine.com.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Boynton, for coming on. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I think we've talked about a whole lot here.
Oh yeah.
And you and I could go on for 16 hours, but I don't think anybody would listen for that long. So we're gonna end it now. And again, I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you so much for having me on here. It was a pleasure.
And now for a mind-shifting moment. In today's episode, we talked about phobias. But as you heard, we went a little deeper than just talking about phobias. We talked about mindset and mind shifting, because your mindset is a large part of your fears, and shifting that is a large part of getting over it instead of it being over you. But I want you to take a deeper dive into a piece of the conversation that we had today. What unrealistic fears do you have? What thinking do you have that doesn't match reality? Who do you fear? What do you fear that is affecting your life? Do you fear failure and it keeps you from succeeding? Do you fear success itself and it keeps you from moving forward? What unrealistic fears do you have in your life that you need to get over instead of it being over you? Just something to think about. Thank you for listening to Mindshift Power Podcast. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at The Mindshifter. If you have any comments, topic suggestions, or would like to be a guest on the show, please visit fatimabay.com/podcast. Remember, there's power in shifting your thinking. Tune in for next week.